It just ordered to have it. If you could run it off the flash drive, because I have videos in it, and I don't think they'll run unless you.
Okay.
Just, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Okay. This is my presentation, stealing the organ from organ donor using Fourier transforms and linear algebra for fun and profit. Who am I? I'm a computational mathematics major. I don't even have a declared minor or track. I keep forgetting to do it. I keep taking classes, but I'm probably going to be the engineering track or whatever. Also, it's not rendering perfectly, but I'm like a part-time musician or whatever, and I've done like programming in my free time for years and years and years, and I guess you could say I'm a music fan, quote unquote. So my first thought was, why don't I do something music related? And so organ donor, though it's probably not going to show. Oh, it might play actually. Oh, has an organ at the start of it. Wow. This is like a huge landmark track in instrumental hip hop. And I was like, I want to steal that organ. Because you can sample it, but it's not the same, you know? I could replicate the organ and get away with none of the distortion of sampling. So, introduction to synthesis. Additive synthesis. Similar to an organ, actually some would say that an organ is an additive synthesizer, is where you take essentially a really, really simple harmonic primitive, let's say literally just a single frequency as sine or cosine, and you add more information by duplicating that primitive at various frequencies. So you start from something very simple and end up with a harmonically complex waveform. Subtractive synthesis is where you take something that's already very harmonically complex and try to cancel out the harmonic information to get a more complex waveform at the end, closer to what you want. Parametric modeling is determining the characteristics of an actual instrument to synthesize it without using audio samples, i.e. like finding we'll get to it. Fourier decomposition. Complex periodic functions can be decomposed into many sine, cosine components by frequency, i.e. transformed into the frequency domain, and this can be accomplished on discrete time-sampled audio using a discrete Fourier transform. Thus, if we have relatively noise-free audio of the audio we want to model, we can generate Fourier coefficients and thus a decomposition by frequency components. And that organ at the start of organ donor has nothing else behind it. It is just that organ. There's a fade in, but the end does not have the fade in, so I clipped that audio bit. The harmonic series. Most melodic instruments have a frequency spectra made up of frequency f and many components n times f, where n is an integer more than 1, i.e. like the fundamental at frequency f, the like first harmonic, quote unquote, at 2 times f, the second harmonic at 3 times f, third harmonic at 4 times f, to infinity. The most general case of this, of course, is the sum of f and n times f, or a sum of frequencies at f and n times f for all n plus 1 out to infinity, and that's referred to as the harmonic series. And it's where a lot of intervals in music are derived from. We can use Fourier decomposition to determine the coefficients of various components in an instrument's harmonic series, and thus we can recreate its frequency spectra and therefore sound. Because if you can recreate the frequency content of an instrument, then you effectively recreate its sound and frequency domain, and through putting that back into time domain via multiplying it and doing a Fourier series sum, you can end up back with discrete time sampled audio. So our model, instruments typically vary their harmonic series by articulations. Like if you play the bottom string of a guitar and the top string of the top string of the guitar is smaller, less heavy, and it winds more. Its harmonic content decays a lot more, and it sustains a lot less. Most instruments have features like that in which playing them differently will result in different sounds, which sounds obvious, but it means for most instruments, you need more complex terms to model that instrument that reflect different features about the instrument, like say e to the negative t for an instrument that decays over time, or just as we'll see, for an organ it's a lot simpler. We can thus track these changes using linear models to the series coefficients. Linear models being fit to those terms, we determine, approximate the articulations of the instrument. Thus, we perform a summation on the components of the Fourier series multiplied by the coefficients our model generates, and we get audio. Trivial case. The organ has no articulations whatsoever. I don't know if anyone here has ever played an organ, but you tap the button, it plays the sound. There's nothing else. Like, that organ is velocity sensitive. I have one at home, not even velocity sensitive. You just press it, you get one sound at a fixed volume, and it does not vary anyway depending on how you play it, which means our model becomes constant valued, like simplest case possible, because the only term we need is 1. And thus, the Fourier coefficients also become constants. So doing the discrete Fourier transform of the note will give us the coefficients with no extra training. Let's try it. So in practice, it looks like this is what my actual model in its most generalized sense looks like. You have an MXN matrix of coefficients multiplied by a 1XM matrix of the terms. This results in our final coefficients to be multiplied by our series of size 1 times n. And the end result is a 1x1, well, scalar. This is just a dot product. This is just a dot product of an nxn row vector, nx1 row vector, and a 1xn column vector. However, because the organ's model becomes constant valued because it has no articulation whatsoever, we get this. Our model simply becomes multiplying the 1xn coefficient vector by 1, and then transposing it and multiplying it by our Fourier series, or doing the dot product between these to get the summation, and we have our audio. So, this is the quote-unquote training side. I took the DFT of the organ from organ donor, as in I clipped one of the notes. I took the DFT from 0 to 2000 hertz because I found it had basically no harmonic content above 2000 hertz. The end result was this. I checked the appropriate FFT bins that correspond to, because you can determine the frequency here. This is about 270 hertz, and I think it's like, oh god, it's a C sharp. And so I can essentially say, okay, we know the frequency, we know this is a C sharp, therefore we know that each harmonic is going to be in this place relative, like this is the second harmonic, this is the third harmonic, and we can check the appropriate FFT bins, and the end result is our coefficients directly, which end up in this components vector here. And does it work? Well, yes, it does. Oh god. Come on. Hey guys, it worked. Okay. That's an organ. That sounds pretty much like the organ at the start of organ donor. So, successes. This model is really small, and it's something like 6 kilobytes of executable code and nothing else. And a less trivial version, i.e., say we had 4 coefficients, a constant coefficient, like e to the negative t, maybe a single linear articulation, and maybe pitch for something like a guitar in which the harmonic content starts dropping off in the high, or in the higher harmonics as you go up in frequency on the actual fretboard. And say we synthesized it all the way out to 500 Fourier series coefficients, would still be on the order of like 20 kilobytes, which is nothing. And it's an order of magnitude, not even an order of magnitude, more like 3 orders of magnitude better performance than a sampling system, just by the nature of the fact that you don't need to store high quality samples of audio. You only need to store a coefficient matrix to resynthesize them on the other end. And this is about the most general approach to parametric synthesis possible, i.e., given a set of terms that approximates the instrument's articulations well enough, you could theoretically synthesize anything using this method, though there are some disadvantages that we'll get to. And yeah, if you can simplify your instrument's behavior to terms and generate coefficients, you can synthesize it. Disadvantages. Finding the correct terms to train against is quite difficult, i.e., you have to understand your instrument's articulations before you can even begin to synthesize it. And doing that it probably requires a lot of the work of determining a purely analytic model, i.e., like one that doesn't even involve like this sort of like linear approximation, like just actually simulating the string or waveguide itself, and that just is probably cheaper, but at the same time, it's not as general. More terms is more multiplication, and depending on the amount of terms and coefficients, you have to perform something like 500-ish 16-wide vector dot products and another dot along the final coefficients to the series that's 500 wide per sample. This can be optimized into a bunch of really nice AVX2. That's a nightmare. And generally, you're going to be running out of CPU time if you really like expand this far. 16 wide is a really like violent, like, what if you take an instrument that's really complex? For some forms of synthesis, you could probably get away with far less coefficients and far tighter, like say SSE2 or APX code. But for very complex instruments, this gets out of hand quite quickly in terms of the actual processing speed needed to perform this in real time. Though the trivial model we see here only costs maybe about 1 to 2% in terms of CPU time on a single core. Also, training this model and its more complex cousins is complicated, and there's no dedicated tools to do it. I was like working on stuff, but at the same time, you'd have to be able to somehow track the articulations over time, and that's a manual job. Doing that, I mean, just short clips of audio from an instrument might be enough data to properly train one of these models, but doing the work of figuring out where each articulation is and figuring out what its value is at any given time is a whole ton of work in and of itself. It's not something you can automate. Possible improvements, more complex modeling. My original intent when I did this was to actually use digital waveguide synthesis, which functions essentially on a solution of the one-dimensional wave equation, where you can essentially say the solution of that is the summation of a left and right going wave, and then essentially from that you can get to an understanding where you have an initial synthesis and a waveguide, where the waveguide provides feedback back into the original synthesized wave, and the end result is much more harmonically complex instrumentation. Most instruments, especially acoustic ones, incorporate feedback into their sound, i.e. the box part of the guitar is essentially a waveguide, a three-dimensional waveguide. And as such, approximating acoustic instruments well involves probably stepping up to a more complex form of synthesis. Though simple things like synthesizer sounds and organs and maybe even like an accordion you could probably get away with without stepping up the model and just keeping a pure additive model. And also some synthesizers, like some forms of synthesis, like FM synthesis, incorporate feedback into their models, and as such, they cannot be approximated using a purely additive system. There's another thing of using trigonometric identities or LUTs to reduce the complexity of the final Fourier sum. My current model essentially calculates every term of the Fourier sum by itself. When there's probably some, I hesitate on this, but I'm pretty sure just from doing a bunch of Fourier series work in my MA 441 class this semester, that there's definitely ways to essentially use trigonometric identities, as all of these are multiples of pi f, or 2 pi f. There's definitely ways to use trigonometric identities to essentially bypass calling sine f or cosine f every for every coefficient in the matrix, every sample, which is a little nightmarish, but we live in very, very nice times, so that's still possible. More complex models, instruments with more articulations, that's the obvious thing, and generalization of this entire structure is very possible. That's what I love about just like thinking about this. It's very, very generalizable. If you are able to come up with the terms, you can synthesize it. And also, like, once you get more complex models can essentially, or models of enough complexity could probably be used to synthesize multiple instruments at once, provided you can swap out the coefficients in the model, where the model encompasses the terms used to synthesize your instrument. I can't pronounce his name, as European would say, screw timbral fascism. Any tools, no matter how eerie and uncanny or worthwhile, exist. The new will exist regardless of our ability to acknowledge or understand it. Do whatever, I guess. And that is my presentation on stealing the organ from organ donor.
Question.
Actually, I have a question. How did you get the audio data into your code initially?
Oh, I literally just loaded it using